I believe that Polkadot could be such a big narrative hypothetically during this bull run, even though nothing I say is financial advice. The only reason why I think so isn't just because I could very well see DOT, its native token, hypothetically go into the price of $150 during this bull run, which is my price target for it. But even besides that, another reason is because I think Polkadot sits in this very unique position where it's pretty much in a market sector that it's pretty much dominating and it really has no competition. Now, some people may be thinking, oh, what do you mean by that, man? That's not true. Well, let's hear this out, because if we take a look at Polkadot, it's focused on something called interoperability. Now, for the people out there that know this market, let's say interoperability, they'll know that the only really notable competitor when it comes to Polkadot is going to be something called Axelar. But Axelar is way smaller than Polkadot. I don't think that's ever going to defeat Polkadot. So if you take a look at it, not many players really focus on interoperability. Polkadot is pretty much number one. Axelar really is never going to defeat it. Isn't it pretty much number one in its sector? That's what I mean. This is how special I think Polkadot is. And you got to think about it. Polkadot kind of gives me the vibe of Bitcoin. When you take a look at Bitcoin, yeah, sure, people like to say that Ethereum is massive, but Ethereum is never going to defeat Bitcoin, right? We take a look at something like the BNB chain. It's never going to defeat Bitcoin. So really, Bitcoin has no direct quote-unquote competitors. But if you take a look at something like Ethereum, it does have a lot of direct competitors. Like some people seem to think that the BNB chain could potentially have better quality projects than Ethereum. Some people may argue that. Some people may argue that, hey, maybe one day Solana could defeat Ethereum in terms of adoption. You know, something like Ethereum has some stiff competition. Take a look at Cardano. Take a look at Avalanche. Take a look at something like Algorand. They're not defeating it as of right now, but at least they're kind of direct competitors. But really, if you take a look at, again, Bitcoin has no direct competitors. That's the vibe that Polkadot is giving me, because, again, Axelar is never going to defeat it, and there's not that many dynamic projects that are focused on interoperability to begin with. Polkadot, it's in this very unique position, which is why I think it could be big narrative, because people usually move in trends, in my opinion. They like meme coins, they like DeFi, they like NFTs, they like blockchain gaming. They seem to want to latch onto the next market that is fantastic and very cool and very interesting. And when it comes to interoperability, I get it. Polkadot is not a small project by any means, but the space really hasn't gained that recognition yet. So imagine once the bull run is in fifth gear, let's say, and once the space recovers in a very amazing way, and let's say people do love projects that are focused on interoperability, Polkadot is pretty much going to be the premier choice, at least in theory and hypothetically. So this is why I like it so much. Keep in mind, why is trying to solve the problem of lacking interoperability such a big deal? It's because if we take a look at many networks out there, many blockchains, a lot of them just by nature, because where they are independent of one another, as a result of that, they can't freely send data and value to each other. Now, of course, as a result, they do lack interoperability in that case. What comes in and saves the day? We have to take a look at these projects that are focused on that. Like, for instance, we take a look at Bitcoin and Ethereum. Because they're independent of one another, they can't freely send data and value to each other. They arguably lack interoperability, and that right there is where something like Polkadot steps in. So that is how special something like Polkadot is. I get it. Some people may think it's a little bit boring, and I get it, right? It's not as flashy as AI. It's not as flashy as, blockchain gaming or whatever. But the way you take a look at it is that this is very useful. And again, it may not be the coolest market, but it's a useful one, in my opinion. Now, we have to take a look at that it's only fair to assume that naturally moving forward, there's going to be more blockchains. There's going to be more networks. I think it's only fair to assume that, especially as the space grows moving forward. And again, many of them, I'm assuming, are going to be independent of one another, and they're going to need a solution to quite essentially freely send data and value to each other. So I would only assume that, again, as the space does grow and as more blockchains, more networks pop up, there's going to be a use. There's going to be a need for something like Polkadot. It's only fair to assume that Polkadot is going to grow along with the ride. It doesn't seem like a project that's going to disappear when the fans and hype and the attention is pretty much not really there when it comes to the retail side of things. I don't think that's going to be the case here, at least from my perspective. Now, we have to take a look at how Polkadot is very unique in a sense that, while most other projects out there are just standalone, Polkadot actually has somewhat of a support system, in my opinion. Now, what is that support system? This is what I like to call it, right? This is something called Kusama, which is basically a canary network to Polkadot. Now, what does this mean? It's just basically a very fancy way of saying how usually projects that want to launch on Polkadot, they're going to usually launch on Kusama first to test out the project under real economic conditions. And then in some cases, they do move on later to Polkadot, even though they don't necessarily have to. However, this is good because it's far cheaper to rent building space on Kusama as opposed to Polkadot. And also on top of that, it's kind of like a funneling system for projects to flow into Polkadot, but then in a much more streamlined and potentially in a more cost-effective way. So this is why sometimes people do love Polkadot, because it's not just this project that stands alone. There's a support system. Again, that's the genius of this whole team, in my opinion, at least the team when it comes to, the ones who develop Polkadot and whatnot. But the way you take a look at it is that when it comes to Kusama, it plays a very unique role. I'm also very bullish on that, but ultimately Polkadot does benefit greatly from that. So I do like this overall. So this is why I think Polkadot could be a big narrative. It's just very special. They thought about the little details. I do like that. And if you think about it, DOT, its native token, going to the price of $150, I don't see why that's too crazy for something this special. I mean, considering current circulating supply, market cap at that point would be worth around $235 billion, which is around a 30x from here. Doesn't seem too bad, right? I mean, that market cap right there is still over $300 billion less than Ethereum's all-time high market cap back in 2021. That's years ago. Even during the peak of that bull run, there was roughly around 300 million crypto owners. Now there's over 600 million, according to Crypto.com research. I think this bull run could be a lot more special. Also, this time around, I think this sentiment is very bullish. Take a look at the Bitcoin ETF, the Ethereum ETF, the number of institutional investors, the amount of enterprise adoption. This is all just very fantastic stuff right here. Not to mention, not too long ago, I even made a video on this, but it was reported that 21 Shares advances with the project of an ETF on Polkadot, updated the request to the SEC. So you can only imagine that, right? Having the potential of something like this could be amazing because people are often focused on the Bitcoin ETF, the Ethereum ETF, and that's great overall. But really, it's about time Polkadot gained that recognition. A Polkadot ETF, at least in this case, could be so beneficial if it does hypothetically get approved again in the case of 21 Shares. So the way I view it is that when it comes to something like Polkadot, of course, I'm bullish on it, and I'm not going to give up when it comes to this because I think it's very special. And if you take a look at it, in terms of what Polkadot is trying to achieve, I think the ceiling is a lot more than Ethereum because Ethereum is just viewed as this layer 1 blockchain. There could be something like Solana that could very well defeat it. You know what I mean? Now, it may not necessarily guarantee that, but at least it has the potential to. When you take a look at Polkadot, it's just more so trying to solve an issue that is, again, lacking interoperability. So it really isn't this project that is dependent on fans and hype. Again, it's dependent on the space growing, which I think it will grow naturally as blockchain adoption increases. So I think this is very unique. I think it could be such a big narrative. And again, DOT, the price of $150, I don't see why not. All I got to do is just stay patient because usually altcoins, as a worst case scenario, they typically peak around 18 months after a Bitcoin halving event. And the last Bitcoin halving event happened in April of last year. So 18 months from then would actually mean around October this year. There's no surefire date or anything like that, but I'm still going to pay attention to it because historically, as a worst case, that has been the case. Now, each cycle is going to be different, but I'm going to pay attention to it nonetheless. And I think the bull run is far from over, and $150, that wouldn't surprise me whatsoever when it comes to DOT. And make sure to subscribe if you gain value from this video. I'd greatly appreciate it. It's Mali the Captain, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.